What is that? This thing has gotten so huge that astronauts can see it with the naked eye from the International Space Station. We're talking about a structure that stretches more than 8,000 kilometers across the Atlantic, from the Caribbean to the coast of West Africa. And even though this mysterious structure grows every year, until recently no one even knew that something like this could exist. What's happening here right now tells us a great deal about the state of our planet.
And honestly, the story behind it is even crazier than you might think at first. We're going to take a very close look at that today. It's going to get really wild today, guys.
Have you heard the rumor that you can see the Great Wall of China from space? It's a persistent one, isn't it? But it's not true at all. However, the gigantic and mysterious structure we're discussing today can actually be seen from space.
So what is this actually about? What is this incredibly huge structure in the Atlantic?
This phenomenon is called the Great Atlantic Sargassum Belt, sometimes abbreviated as GASP. It's not a geological formation or a cloud structure, but rather vast quantities of a brown seaweed called sargassum. And this seaweed has a really clever trick up its sleeve. It doesn't grow on the ocean floor, but simply drifts along the water's surface for its entire life. This is made possible by a whole series of tiny gas-filled bubbles that look a bit like miniature grapes and give the seaweed enough buoyancy to float permanently in the sunlight and carry out photosynthesis. Originally, this algae was known almost exclusively from a single area, the so-called Sargasso Sea, which is so special because it is the only sea in the world that borders no land at all, but is bounded only by ocean currents. Even Portuguese sailors centuries ago were fascinated and also quite frightened by the vast carpets of algae.
And Christopher Columbus is also said to have feared back then that his ships could get caught in the seaweed forever and never return. And for millions of years that was actually perfectly fine. Because these seaweed forests form an important ecosystem in which over 100 fish species and more than 140 invertebrate species live that cannot exist anywhere else.
A few inhabitants of these algal forests have even adapted so perfectly that they become nearly invisible. The so-called sargassum fish, for example, has evolved camouflage that looks strikingly similar to the algae itself, complete with small appendages that resemble algal leaves.
It's almost as if there were people who had evolved to look like a McDonald's branch. Between the service counters and the Big Macs, they appear practically invisible. Maybe such people really do exist and their camouflage is just so good that we don't know anything about it.
Okay. For all these species, the seaweed carpet is essentially a floating nursery in the middle of the open ocean and has been for millions of years. Some fossil finds are over 30 million years old, but as always, when something is really good, something eventually goes wrong. In the spring of 2011, something suddenly happened that no one had anticipated. Tons of sargassum began washing up on Caribbean beaches in quantities never seen before. Since then, the problem has grown larger every year. In the American news, the sargassum invasion has already been dubbed the blob.
Now, this is what you've been hearing about in the media, that 5,000-mile-long blob of sargassum seaweed. Well, it's not a continuous stretch, but it is certainly a very large area where that seaweed is present. And if you were to smash it all together, researchers assume it would be about the size of the state of Delaware. But still, it's a problem, and it washes up on local beaches. Now, the important thing for us to realize here along the Texas Gulf Coast is that the primary current that runs through the Gulf out of the Caribbean is the Gulf Stream, takes most of that seaweed eastward towards Florida and the Atlantic Ocean. What we have is a local sargassum population in the northwestern Gulf that moves towards the Texas coastline. So that's where the majority of our sargassum comes from. I've been in touch with some researchers that are looking into this. They say it's really impossible to predict if any of that blob is going to make its way over here. But what these researchers have been doing is creating a sargassum inundation index, or basically a look at the risk that you're going to encounter this seaweed along local coastlines. And the orange and the red that you see through the Caribbean, that is a problem. Meanwhile, the Gulf of Mexico.
For the entire GESP, current measurements now amount to over 38 million tons of biomass distributed over a belt more than 8,000 kilometers long. Unbelievable, right? So what the hell actually happened there? A research team investigated exactly this question.
In the process, they arrived at a rather surprising conclusion. Between 2009 and 2010, an extreme weather pattern known as the North Atlantic Oscillation caused unusual wind patterns that drove part of the sargassum population far eastward toward Africa from its traditional home in the Sargasso Sea. Once there, the algae suddenly found perfect growing conditions, and from then on, its population grew rapidly. Marine scientist Frank Muller-Karge from the University of South Florida describes the finding this way. This is a surprising result, because we had previously assumed that rivers were primarily responsible for the supply of nutrients. Instead, our model shows that nutrients from deep water layers are fueling the blooms. By the way, folks, if you've enjoyed the video so far, please consider subscribing to my channel. You'll be supporting my work more than you can imagine and helping me a lot to keep the channel going.
If you've already subscribed, giving the video a thumbs up helps a lot. 5,000 likes should appease the YouTube algorithm because of algae algorithm.
You serious?
I apologize for that joke. Well, anyway. Wind and currents alone do not explain why the whole thing has been happily expanding for 15 years. And here comes the actually exciting part. Nutrients, more precisely nitrogen and phosphorus.
Historically, sargassum was quite limited because there were hardly any nutrients in the open ocean. Since the 1980s, the nitrogen content in the algae's tissue has increased by over 50%. And this enrichment comes largely from land, from fertilizers, untreated wastewater, and the deforestation of the Amazon rainforest. The Amazon and the Mississippi act essentially like giant funnels, pumping vast amounts of nutrients into the Atlantic, right where the sargassum is concentrated. With so much food all at once, the algae can double its mass in just 11 days. In 11 days? I couldn't have done that even in my pizza eating heyday. But okay, that doesn't sound particularly dramatic at first. More nutrients simply mean more life. But too much of a good thing can throw an entire ecosystem out of balance, and that's exactly what's happening here right now. As long as sargassum drifts in the open ocean, it's a valuable habitat, but as soon as the massive mats are washed ashore, the whole situation completely changes. As it decomposes, sargassum releases large amounts of toxic hydrogen sulfide gas which smells like rotten eggs. In 2018 alone, over 11,000 cases of acute poisoning from this gas were documented in the Caribbean. In addition, the algae blocks sunlight from reaching the corals and other marine life beneath it. And when it finally dies, its decomposition consumes so much oxygen in the water that it creates veritable dead zones where fish die in agony. For the affected coastal regions, this poses not only an ecological problem, but also an economic one. Tourism collapses, and in some countries, cleaning the beaches alone costs millions every year. And there's another unpleasant twist to the story. A research team led by Peter Morton of Texas A&M University discovered that, under certain conditions, elevated concentrations of arsenic can accumulate in sargassum. He describes it this way: when sargassum lacks phosphorus, it sacrifices quality for quantity and absorbs other elements whose chemical properties resemble those of phosphorus. Arsenic is the most important of these. In the end, it becomes incredibly highly enriched with arsenic, perhaps 1,000,000 times more concentrated than what you'd find in the seawater in which it grows.
So, you should probably advise against consuming a sargassum smoothie on these hot summer days, folks. Perhaps that is also why there are now hotel resorts that have invested in infrastructure to keep sargassum away from their beaches. And yet, or perhaps precisely because of this, there are now research teams worldwide trying to turn this huge problem into an opportunity. For example, by processing the algae into biofuel, compost or fertilizer, or even extracting rare earth metals from it. In concrete terms, there is little of that so far, but given the amount that ends up on the beaches here every year, it wouldn't surprise me if someone finds a clever way to make it usable on a massive scale in the coming years. Let me know in the comments if you have any creative ideas for using this algae. How about an algae burger patty? The new Sargassum. I would try it.
Brother,
Well, in the end, this massive algae belt shows us one thing above all. What we do on land, how we fertilize, how we deal with sewage, and how we treat our rainforests has direct, visible consequences thousands of kilometers away in the middle of the ocean. A phenomenon that has only existed in this form for 15 years and that definitely hasn't had the last word yet. I will definitely keep you updated as soon as there are new findings on the Sargassum Belt. Feel free to subscribe to my channel now, and don't forget to hit the like button so we can crack 5,000 likes. Thanks, guys. And now let's stick with the secrets of our Earth.
Scientists have discovered evidence of lost civilizations that existed long before our modern civilization. The key term here is the Silurian hypothesis, that is, the question of whether a highly advanced civilization might have existed on Earth long before humans, and how scientists are even trying to find out. Be sure to check out the video in the top right corner to learn all about it. It's super exciting, I promise. As always, there's another topic related to science and space in the bottom right corner. Otherwise, I'd say see you in the next video. Take care, everyone.